Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Weitzner. I'm director of the USC Summer Program and acting director for USC of the YouTube Creator Institute. And I want to welcome all of you on behalf of Dean Elizabeth Daly, Dean of the School of Cinematic Arts, and tell you that this is a very exciting evening. This is a first for us. We have never done this before. We are thrilled to be partners with Google YouTube in this event. For those who don't know, we have with us 10 participants from YouTube who were selected out of people who applied all over the world to be here with us, and I'd like to ask them to just stand up and be recognized for a moment, please. They've just gotten to campus. Thank you. At the same time, I'd also like to recognize Pablo Frasconi, our professor, whose work on this and tireless work on the syllabus to do this in 4.5 weeks is amazing. Pablo, if you would stand. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce my associate from Google and the architect of this entire program, Mr. Bing Chen.
Thank you, David. David's being very generous. David is likewise the co-architect of this. So we were actually remarking earlier, we're very excited to be here because today is actually YouTube's 6th birthday, so we're celebrating. So this, Mr. Landau, is quite the birthday present for us. So thank you for giving it to us. To give you all some perspective on why YouTube is doing this and whatnot, YouTube, as you all know, is a truly valuable distributor of content, a truly valuable stage. We have over 3 billion views every single day. And certainly a lot of content, a lot of meaningful content is meeting those eyes. So we are excited to announce this morning, for instance, that we upload, or the world rather, people like you upload, over 48 hours of content every single day. It's a staggering number. But what we realized a few months ago, and this, with David and several others around the industry, as well as around the technology industry, was that simply being a large stage is not good enough. And we realized that in order to have a strong stage, we also had to have strong creators, actors, writers, musicians, directors, so forth and so on. And so what we realized is we wanted to create a mission that we refer to as YouTube Next, whereby we could supercharge creators everywhere, everything from funding to training to tools to promotion, so forth and so on. And so the YouTube Creator Institute that we've created with partners like the USC School of Cinematic Arts and many more to come seeks to do exactly that, to nurture these creators. And we hope that all of you will learn substantial amounts of stuff in the coming 4 weeks to make sure that you guys are very successful in 21st century media. And so the final thing I'll say is a very, very heartfelt thanks similarly to Pablo Frasconi for also co-architecting this entire program for the last few months, as well as Liz Harmon, Dean Elizabeth Daly, of course, and our very, very dear friend David Weitzner. And with that, I think my co-lead, Mahin Ibrahim, who leads the USC portion, would like to say a few short words.
Great, thank you. And again, thank you all for those who are in attendance today, as well as those watching online. So I'd like to leave with a special message to all of you to think critically about what you want the next generation of content to look like. Whether that be for something that is for the traditional theater, the mobile phone, or online. What do you want it to represent, and what do you want it to leave for the next generation? And with that, I'll pass it back to David, and please join us in welcoming Mr. Landau.
Ladies and gentlemen, on my left, Dr. Michael Renov, Associate Dean of the School of Cinematic Arts and Professor of Critical Studies, who has graciously volunteered his time to moderate tonight's comments from Jon Landau. With regard to Jon, I have in my hand a cheat sheet because I'd be foolish not to. But just realizing that we go back a little further than I thought, having worked for his mother and father. I wanted to tell you that seated here tonight is not only the Academy Award-winning producer of Avatar, the producer of Titanic, and a producer of so many other classic features including a number of films that he put into production when he was a senior production executive at 20th Century Fox. But more importantly to anything, I could say he is a graduate of the USC School of Cinematic Arts and the recipient of the Mary Pickford Award, which is something that he shares with Robert Zemeckis and a group of major players in the industry. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Renov and Jon Landau. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you so much.
What's Google? No, just kidding. It's my homepage. It's my homepage. Okay.
Well, there's so many parodies of your work on Google. I'm sure you're watching it if only to see what others are doing.
Well, I watch it to see. I watch YouTube to see my kids' videos. You know, they're both musicians, and I turn to their pages to see them all the time.
Well, Jon, I'm going to just add to what's been said already about thanking you for being here. It's a real pleasure to have you come back and to be here with all of us. I want to take you back just a bit to ask you about what your student experience was like, since, as David says, you were a student here in the late 70s and into the early 80s, and what kind of preparation you feel you may have gotten, or some kind of head start into this business that you're in.
Well, I feel really one of the best things that I got about my experience at USC was that it was a liberal arts education. Film was my major, but it wasn't the only thing that I got to focus on. And I tell people when I go out to schools and I speak now and at high schools and they're looking to go into college, I say, as a filmmaker, it's just as important to take the history classes, to take the English classes, to take the philosophy classes, to understand we're telling stories about people and stories that relate to people. And we have to have an understanding of those things. And then what was great about what the film major gave me, it was a way to apply. And it was okay to make mistakes. And I think that was one of the really great things that USC offered, because as young filmmakers, you do make mistakes. And it's very tough to put your film up in front of a class and you sit in the center of a circle and everybody tells you, wow, your film sucked. Now, there's some truth in what they're saying and there's some false, and you have to weed through that. But I've learned that that's really the process of making a big feature film. You know, we're not making the films for ourselves. We're making the films for an audience, whether it's a YouTube audience or whether it's an audience in a theater. And we have to take their feedback and create the best content that engages them.
But I'm sure when you were here at that point, I don't think we were very involved in specialized teaching, let's say for producing. That we have a Peter Stark producing program now. It's a graduate program. It began after your time.
You know, there was none, and it was one of the things that, you know, I didn't have an opportunity to do, to experience that producing curriculum. But the rest of the curriculum of being involved in movies and seeing a process from the beginning all the way to the end, that's really what a producer does in any situation. So as a student filmmaker, you're always producing. You might be producing your own content, and even if you're helping a friend and you don't have the title producer, but you're there from the beginning to the end, you're in some ways producing that project. And you know, my experience here is, you know, I look back and it's about interacting with people. How do you work with people with a common goal? How do you share that same vision? And you know, as a producer, it's not always your vision you're there to realize. You're there to take someone else's vision and share that vision and then make it a reality.
But now, most of us have noticed that the producing credits on motion pictures have really changed in the last 10 or 20 years. It used to be there might be one producer, two producers. Now there's so many. It's a little confusing for most of us. Can you tell us why this proliferation of the producing credit, if what you've just described is seeing the big picture and making it happen from beginning to end?
Well, I think you have to look at and distinguish producing credits from co-producing credits, associate producing credits. They all mean something different, but it's really about the job that you do. You know, and it's different than television. In television, the executive producer is normally where the buck stops. On feature films, it's the producer, so it's the opposite. And I think what it is, you have people who have worked and earned the right to sort of be involved and have a creative input in a process where they might not have before. So a first assistant director who you've worked with several times Josh Mclaughlin on Titanic I'd worked with Josh before and introduced him to Jim. When he came back to work on Avatar, we gave him an associate producer credit. We let him have more of a hands-on involvement. And there's a way of acknowledging that. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do as producers, is to make people feel a part of the creative process. To me, nobody cares where a good idea comes from. A good idea is a good idea. So we try on our films to really preserve the producer credit, not the co-producer, not the associate producer credit, to the people who actually produce the films. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I was finishing up Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I went and met with Warren Beatty. And Warren and I ended up doing Dick Tracy together, but Warren was the producer of that film. And he said, what credit do you want? I said, producer. He said, you can't have that. I said, okay. He says, what other credit? He said, you want executive producer? And I said, no, I'll take, co-producer. So you want co-producer? Yeah, I'll take co-producer. He didn't understand the reasoning behind that until one day when we were in the middle of production and Barry Diller came to visit the set. And Warren said, Barry, I'd like to introduce you to Jon Landau, my co-producer. And suddenly it sounded just the same as if I was a producer, and he said co-producer. Mm-hmm. And then he understood why.
Now, you've produced in a variety of different contexts. As David said, you were an executive on the lot at Fox.
Right.
And you were a pretty young man at that point in your life.
I was.
And yet you were kind of in charge of...
I think I still am.
Well, compared to me, you are, yeah. But describe, if you would, what that transition was like from being an executive working for a studio, which most of us don't really understand anyway.
Right. Well, I'm going to describe it first, going from producing into a studio world. And I was relatively young for that position. I went in to 20th Century Fox as really an executive vice president position at the age of 28. And I went in with the specific reason of learning. Something that I think, and I say this to everybody, education goes long beyond your years in school. And I really looked at this as a great learning opportunity for me to see how the industry works from the inside out. We're in a studio-driven business. We might be in a YouTube-driven business in the future, but in those days, we're in a studio-driven business. And to be on the inside, and when they asked me to come in, and it was really initially to head up what they termed their physical production department. And I said to Joe Roth, who was running the studio at the time, I said, that would be great, but I want to be able to go to the weekend read meetings. I want to be able to go to the marketing meetings. I want to be a part of all of those different things so I could learn and take something away from it. And I was at the studio for about 4.5, 5 years and really tried to say, look, there is no difference between physical production and creative production. It's all the same, it's production. Because the decisions you make creatively affect the physical production side and vice versa. It's just like you can't say, we'll fix it in post. You've got to take the big picture. And that, I think, was an eye-opening thing for a lot of the studio executives there, at the time. But during the course of that, I got exposed to marketing and the reasoning behind marketing, really looking at why does a movie get greenlit? How do studios look at something from a financial standpoint? All of these different things. And along the way, I worked with different directors in different situations, and half the time I did my job by being on location with a filmmaker. When a film was in some sort of trouble, whether it was creative trouble or production trouble, I was the one who went out there, and that's actually how I got to know Jim Cameron. They were doing True Lies at the time, and Peter Chernin at some point said to Jim, hey, don't call me, deal with Jon. And I went on location with Jim for about 4 months. And we got to know each other during that process. And when I made the decision to leave, I told a couple of the directors that I had known that I was leaving, and very flatteringly, all three said, hey, do I want to do the next thing with them? And Jim was one of those three. And the project was a project at the time called Planet Ice. And Planet Ice was the code name for Titanic. So when we did the deep dive expedition, we did it under that name because it was public domain material, and we didn't want it to go out. And I've really utilized, I think, producing since then, that experience I had at the studio, from understanding something from the other side. And I think that's important to do in whatever we do. I think when we're dealing with an actor and asking an actor for something, think about it from their perspective, just like I learned at the studio. How are they taking it? And it's something I try and have an influence in. It has an influence in everything I do as a producer.
Okay, so you've just described how you at the age of 28, you were in a big playpen. You were learning how to do just about everything, and from as many perspectives as possible.
And by the way, I should say that while I was there, I also did a bunch of short movies, which was a lot of fun, where we would sit there. One in particular that I remember, and it plays into, I think, that where we are today, which is Fox was going up to LucasArts to try and sell them on Fox being the distributor of the next series of films. And I came up with the idea of doing episode 7, the distribution wars. and it was the battle for the rights to the next trilogy. And I stole footage from the movie. I inserted Tom Sherrick, who's now president of the Academy, in a little blonde wig, and he was Luke Skywalker. And we did this whole thing and presented it up to George up at the ranch, and it was great. So I played while I was an executive, too.
Do you have the same sense of humor when people are playing around with your work?
Oh, absolutely not. and it was a very nerve-wracking thing. Howard Rothman, who was head of LucasArts licensing, knew that we were doing this. So we sort of got the okay to do it. I shared with him the script that we were doing. And one of the most flattering things that I've had happen to me is that after we presented it, George asked for a copy to go into the archives. And I said, okay, we did okay then.
You did something right.
We did.
Okay, so here's this transition, and help us with this. You decide to leave Fox,
right,
and you're going to partner with one person. And up until now, you've been learning so many things and so many angles with so many different people, a lot of relationships, no doubt. And I think I'm right to say that producing is a lot about cultivating many relationships.
It's all about cultivating relationships on different levels. It's not just about cultivating the relationships with the directors or the writers, but it's with all the other people that you don't have to work on, because you're only as good as the people who are working for you. And I look at a producer's responsibility as hiring people who are smarter in their jobs than we could ever be. So, so coming out of that, I didn't say that I wanted to partner with somebody. Jim shared with me a very early draft of Titanic, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with not just the script, but with the idea that this could be the last time an epic, old-fashioned movie is made, with hundreds and hundreds of extras that aren't digital, and doing all those things. And that really excited me. And the love story that was there. And I went off as a one-off to do Titanic. And it was going through that experience with Jim where we built up a greater, I think, mutual respect and a mutual bond with each other. And coming out of that, we said, wait, rather than, John, you going off and doing your own thing, why don't you come into the Lightstorm fold, be a part of it, and we'll do things together. And it was only at that point that I said, yeah, this works, it's great. What better filmmaker could I have who not just makes great movies, but he challenges you every day. That thing I was talking about, of learning and growing and expanding. And I think that's the opportunity that I was suddenly presented with, and it wasn't planned. And I don't think anything in the industry, as people move out into the industry, can be planned. You have to sort of go with the ebbs and flows. I told somebody a story the other day that one of the first movies I worked on coming out of USC was a movie of the week, and I was a set PA on it, and I worked for 6 weeks, and it was a great experience. But I really learned about that much because I was always locking up a street 4 blocks away. Somebody then asked me if I wanted to work in the accounting office, doing some filing to help them for a couple weeks. I had no interest in accounting, and I certainly had no interest in filing, but I said yes. And you know what? I read everything I filed. Now, I don't know that I was supposed to, but I did. And I learned more in those 2 weeks, so you never know where those things are going to come from.
Very interesting. The thing about working with someone like Jim Cameron, I'm sure, is that
The gray hair.
the gray hair.
Okay.
Big projects. You don't take on small things, big projects. And so you have to go from thinking about details, which I'm sure as a producer, you do have to think about details. You hire good people, but
Right.
you have to also think of, and now you have to think on a much grander scale, not just time-wise, but scale and scope, big projects. How do you think about that? How does that change your life when you've got something like not only an Avatar, but then you're thinking, okay, Avatar 2, Avatar 3, let's shoot them at the same time. Let's let's build a little world down here in Manhattan Beach, and this is now, these decisions that you make are in the newspaper. It's big local news. It's big international news.
Well, I think number one, what you have to do is the single thing you have to always focus on is the story of what you're trying to tell. And then everything else is in service of that. So if you say, okay, here's the story, now let's step back. How do we do that? That's how the whole Avatar production pipeline really evolved. Jim wrote Avatar before we filmed Titanic. I read Avatar, or a draft in a scriptment form of it. The technology at the time did not exist to tell that story. But it never left my mind. It never left my mind, how do we someday do that? And as we were looking at the landscape of what was going on technologically, it was in 2005 that we said, Jim, I think we could be the impetus to push technology where we need to get. Now, we didn't have all the answers of the details, but just in looking at what Peter Jackson had done with Gollum, what we had done on Titanic, what Rob Legato had done on Aviator, where we had done some very early, what we call virtual production, and took Rob Legato and his team and brought them in, and now we got into the detail. But that detail was always in service of a story. And always keeping that in mind, and never getting it lost, because I think that's where pictures go off stride. Nobody sets out to make a bad movie, but somehow bad movies are made. And I feel, having been at a studio, that's because along the way, the team forgets their target, and somebody says, let's make it funnier, and it's not a comedy. Somebody says, let's have more action, and it's not an action movie, and suddenly you can't get back. So as a producer, I think you're that rudder that sort of needs to keep the ship on course, and you're doing all the details on the ship to keep the engine running, but you got to keep it on that target.
Is it more complicated when your writer is also your director? In this case, it's a partnership of two, but that other guy is doing a whole lot of things.
Hey, look, let's be honest. Jim says, John, we create the illusion of a partnership. No, but no, look, I've been, the way I look at it, I've been with Jim now 17 years, so it definitely is a partnership, and he looks at it that way. It is both a blessing and a curse. I think the blessing is that Jim is a writer first. And I tell people that, in my opinion, Jim has 3 stages of writing. One is the script. The second writing stage is when he's working with the actors on the set, and they're improvising, and they're adding things, and there's spontaneity brought to those moments. So I always tell people, what you come out of with Daily, it's going to be better than what you went in. And his third phase of writing is editing, where he edits, and yes, he does that, but he also, in his mind, is reworking the script and reworking the story and never losing sight of those things. So that's the blessing. The negative side is, as a writer, every scene becomes your child. Mm-hmm. And you have to give up some of those children as you go through the process of a movie. And it's trying to, show him early enough on, especially on a film like Avatar, where there's a finishing cost to every scene, and not letting those go too far down the path. Here's an opportunity, Jim, we can lose this scene. Let's lose it now. We're going to lose it later. Let's do this, let's do that. You can't have all the answers. So I think, that's sort of our role in trying to expose and let him see those things, and ultimately he's going to make those decisions. And that's something else that I've learned. I think that the people who have the most confidence in themselves are the people who enlist the most input from others. And I got that first from Warren Beatty. Warren has the utmost confidence himself, and he would sit there and say, tell me what you think, tell me what you think, and he would accept this, because at the end of the day, he would make the final decision. Mm-hmm. But it makes for a better product, because again, it's about ideas, and let Jim or a Warren or Michael Mann be the arbiter of those ideas.
So, okay, 3D. Somewhere along the line, you're talking about technology in service to story, but somewhere along the line, you realized that you were going to be going out on a bit of a limb. Am I right?
It wasn't a limb. We didn't believe it was a limb. we believed it was a natural progression because it goes back to what I said. It's about, for us, 3D is about storytelling. 3D is not about a world coming out of a window. It's about creating a window into a world, enhancing your audience's narrative storytelling experience. Just like stereo sound did when we went to stereo. It's become commonplace now, but that adds to the stereo experience. When we're watching George Lucas's movie or Steven Spielberg, I mean, I remember the storming of Normandy, you know, in Saving Private Ryan. And it wasn't just how he shot it visually, is what would he do with the sound and how would he play with the sound? And when you'd go underwater and you would just have the bullets and all those things, and you were immersed in it. You were immersed in it from an auditory way. But cinema is a visual experience. And really, since the 1950s, we had not done anything that had changed the visual experience of the theater going. We had widescreen Technicolor back in the 50s. So for us, this was doing to a visual medium what audio had already happened in a visual medium. That's how we looked at it.
So what stage of, you said you read the script years and years
Right.
before. Were you already thinking three-dimensionally when you read that?
No, we were not. We didn't start thinking about 3D until two things happened. One, Jim had already done at that time T2 3D for Universal Studios, which was a theme park ride where they shot it with 65 millimeter cameras. Jim loved the result but hated the process because these cameras were behemoths. You needed two of them. They weighed 300 pounds. When they pushed the dolly for action sequences, they had to have the stuntmen run at half speed because that's as fast as they could push this huge dolly. And it wasn't a way to make a movie. After Titanic, we went on a getaway trip. We went down to Truck Lagoon for some scuba diving. And Vince Pace came with us, and Vince Pace brought a very early HD camera with him. And we went into the wrecks at Truck Lagoon. And suddenly Jim, who had spent hours and hours lighting on the abyss and moving around heavier cameras, was shooting with this very small natural camera in scuba, getting great, incredible looking material. And it was the potential of HD and the size that you could create an HD camera that said, wait a second, maybe we can get that result we love with a process that is filmmaker friendly. And Jim and Vince began working, and we went to Sony, and we worked with Sony to create a new camera that allowed a lighter weight camera to create a 3D rig that in fact actually today weighs less than a film rig with a 1,000-foot magazine on it. And when we shot Avatar, we were hand holding, we were up on cranes, we were doing all the same things that we would do and not encumbering the filmmaking process.
But since you're also, yeah, and you're right in the middle of the creative process, I understand, but there's got to be another part of you as the producer who's thinking, well, gosh, other things are going to happen that we don't have control over, like theaters.
Like theaters, absolutely. Yeah. And you know, and part of my role on Avatar was to sell exhibition, not just in North America. I went around the world. I went to Russia, I went to Brazil, I went to Spain, I went to France, I went to Germany, I went to Japan, I went to China, all these different places, showing them the potential of 3D and how we were utilizing it. And we felt that when we started out on Avatar, we would be happy if worldwide there were 1,000 theaters that could play a movie in 3D. I think we ended up on close to 5,000 screens worldwide in 3D. And again, it goes back to what is your role as a producer and that whole overarching thing and being able to do it and sell it to exhibition. And at first we sold it in the absence of Avatar. We had a show reel, and a lot of it was sports related, a lot of it was this related. Then we started getting some early material in from Avatar. And we started showing that. And then we went to Cinema Expo, which is exhibitors from Europe. It's coming up this June. And we showed about 20 minutes of Avatar. And they started to get it. And what it is internationally, there are emerging markets. Russia is certainly an emerging market. So these markets that are emerging were putting in new theaters as we were making Avatar. Suddenly they're putting in a projector. They don't have to replace a projector. And our point to them was, if you're putting in a projector, make it a 3D compatible projector. There's no reason not to, to be able to do that.
Because
And
people are thanking you now.
and we're thanking them. I mean, it's really a two-way street.
Yeah.
How do we, as movie makers, where we make movies for the big screen, and that's what I think we'll always do, and they're great avenues of distribution. And I did a presentation not too long ago, and I started out with 3 quotes that each spoke about the demise of the film industry. One said, there's more avenues competing for the entertainment, all these things. And then I said the dates of the quotes, 1943, 1957, and 1983. The theater experience is here to stay. The YouTube experience is here to stay. Television's here to stay. DVDs are here to stay. So how do we, if we're making movies for the big screen, how do we continue to draw people out of their homes? How do we give them an experience that they want to share in a communal sense? And if you think about it, I believe it's human nature to want to share the communal. The Greek tragedies, since then, people have been going and sharing that experience. And that shared experience is what we offer in a theater. So.
You're a salesman.
But if you go out on these shows and be showing stuff from Avatar, and I'd say, yeah, I'm going to do another dog and pony show, but I'm the dog. The movie's the pony, and I'm just, so.
But you're very good at it. That's good.
Learned it here.
Everything you
No,
know.
you want to know something else? I say that, there's a little truth in every
Music
joke.
to my ears. Keep going.
No, one of the classes I took as part of the broader liberal education was a speaking class here, and it was a great learning experience of how to create presentations, how to do them, and that's what I go back to about learning. Is it's a well-rounded education.
Yeah. Well, nowadays in this school there are such things as pitch classes, and we discovered that almost everybody needs to know how to pitch.
Is that baseball or?
Yeah, curveball. Everybody, you know how to throw a curveball.
Exactly.
I can tell. Okay, so
No, I think that's great that you're offering that, because I think that's something that people really don't know how to do. I can't tell you how many times I've had very talented writers come in, and they go to pitch something and they don't know how to pitch it. They don't get that. So I think that's a very important skill. And I think that, again, the job of a producer, you're pitching every day of your life. You're pitching the actor on why they should do the movie. You're pitching, the exhibitor on why they should come in. You're pitching the studio on why they should make the movie.
you're even pitching your partner on why you should cut that scene.
Absolutely. Or I'm pitching someone else to go pitch my partner, so it's not me.
Even better, even better. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people have questions about such things as if other people are trying to replicate a career like yours, and I, just from what I've already heard, I can't imagine that there are too many carbon copies, because you got to start reading everybody's photocopying when you go to do the filing, and But so what do you think the skill sets are nowadays for young people who are trying to make their way into a very competitive industry?
It's a very competitive industry. But I think that there are more opportunities than ever before. I mean, now filmmaking tools can go into the hands of anybody. And you can start and you can produce the content, you can distribute it on YouTube, and you can get responses, and you can really see, what works. I think that the skill set to me is it's about people. It's about interacting with people more than it is just the specific technical skills. I also think that I say to people when they're looking to attack a project, find a project where when somebody asks you what it's about, you don't answer with the plot. You answer with the theme. Because themes are what make movies work to me. The theme is something you leave the theater with. The plot is what you leave at the theater. And I don't care if that's a 1-minute movie you're making. I don't care if it's a 5-minute. That's what it's about. And I think that's something that people really need to keep in mind. I also say go out there and take the opportunity. Get that job, whether it's in the filing office or somewhere else, and realize that once you have that job, you're no longer working for that job, you're working for your next job. Because it's going to be someone that you meet in that situation. It's going to be someone who hears about you from that situation, who recommends you to somebody else. That is the path of my career. Mm-hmm. When I look back, it's about going, and someone from the last show recommended me to this one, and someone from this one recommended me to that one, and it's because I did the job in that moment. I supported them, and I push myself, and you know, separate yourself by work ethic. I think that's the best thing I would say.
Yeah, I guess given what the kind of legend that surrounds how much work is required to do the big projects that you're doing, you got to have a work ethic. You got to be prepared to work harder to outwork the competition.
And it's not just big projects, small projects.
Yeah.
Doesn't, you know, people think that a smaller movie is easier to make than a bigger movie. They're all impossible. Let's be honest. So I think it's really, you know, applying yourself, you know, and having a passion.
Yeah.
And you know, people say, well, you guys don't do a lot of movies. And I say that's because we haven't found enough that fuels a flame of passion. Because when you do it, you're giving 110% of yourself.
Now, there are some questions that have come to us from around the globe.
Okay.
So let me begin with, this is Garrett from Ulsan, South Korea.
Okay.
I'm an
By the way, before you tell it, we talked about 3D.
Yep.
Avatar was released in 4D in South Korea. They came back to us, the South Korean, you know, distribution office, and asked us if we would be okay with them releasing the movie in 4D. And they have chairs in the theaters that they program to move with the film. And we said, okay, but we said our technical person, Jeff Burdick from our company, had to go over and see it and make sure it was okay. And he went over and he said it was a great experience, a different experience, but so in South Korea, we were in 4D.
So would you look for theaters where they're about to change out the seats and say, look, it's the same price, a little
I'm
more?
not there yet, I'm not there. But getting it in my home, that's a different thing.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Garrett. I'm an English teacher in South Korea, but dreaming of making it big in Hollywood someday. Right now, I'm creating my reel. What makes a reel stand out, in your opinion?
I think what makes a reel stand out to me, and you know, we see a lot.
First of all, tell everybody what a reel is.
A reel is a.
Because people don't even know what a reel, literally don't know what a reel is.
Right. How I would describe a reel is a visual resume of somebody's body of work. And they compile it together and they submit it to you on a DVD, they submit it to you now on YouTube, they submit it to you in many different ways. And I go back to what makes a reel noticeable is, number one, it can't be too long because we don't have the retention span to do that. But one that hits you emotionally. One that when you watch it, it's not just a visual cacophony, but there's something emotionally that grabs you in a very short amount of time. And I think that's what would stand out to me.
So that seems to connect with what you said about passion.
I think so. I think it's passion. This connects with theme. I think I think they're all really connected here. And I think how do you separate it? Maybe you're looking at something for 3 minutes. Maybe it's really good and you watch it for 5 minutes. But why are you watching it? Why are you getting beyond that initial point? There has to be a hook. There has to be something that is compelling, more that does more than just the visual cortex.
And do you think, I'm going to kind of mention the Google connection here, do you think that comes across in small formats? Because you've talked about big to small, but can it still be vital in that way?
I think it absolutely can. I think that I know people who have watched Avatar on their mobile devices and loved the movie in a compelling way. I don't think that changes. I think that you can do as compelling a story on a YouTube type of platform as you can on a big screen. You're experiencing it differently. Mm-hmm. You're experiencing it in your home. You're experiencing it on your iPad or one of these devices. So I think it goes back to if you're producing product for that, where are you putting your effort? If I'm producing it for YouTube, I'm not putting my effort at Weta Digital to make everything look great on a 40, 50-foot screen. But my effort in all of these is on the story, is on the content. And something is just as dramatic here as it is there.
Great. I'm going to go with the second Korean question.
Okay.
Is
this from the north?
I wish. No, this is Kum Hee from Seoul. What's the best advice anyone has given you for film? In fact, what's the best advice anyone has given you in life?
In life, I'm going to, sort of say that it's sort of the same thing, which is David Picker. David Picker ran Columbia Studios for a while, he ran United Artists for a while, and he happened to be the producer of the first feature film that I ever worked on out of college, which was a film called Beat Street. It was a breakdancing movie. Through a series of circumstances, I was asked to stay on and supervise post-production. I knew very little about it. I didn't tell them that. So I went, I stayed
Is that
on.
another piece of advice?
That's another piece of advice, absolutely. And we had a deadline. We were supposed to be premiering at the Cannes Film Festival. And the music editor came to me and said, John, we're not going to be able to make delivery in time to make that date. I said, really? He goes, yep, there's too much. And I said, okay, I was 23 years old. I knew exactly what to do. I'd march into the producer's office and let them know that. So we marched into David Picker's office, and I said, David, Tom here says we're not to be able to make our delivery date. What do you want to do? And he didn't get upset. Very matter-of-factly, he looked at me and said, John, I pay you to tell me how it can get done, not that it can't get done. And he got up and he walked out. That was it.
Of his own office.
He walked out of his own office and left us there. We're like, whoa. And you know what? We made our delivery date. And I think that's whether it's in life or whether it's in a movie, we're there to be problem solvers. We're there to solve the problems of our kids, to solve the problems that we have on a film set, and to find a way to make something happen. And I think that's something that I'll never forget David told me.
Nice. Guillaume from Paris.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
Nice country.
By the way, that was all my French. So don't
That's out of the way. How do you balance story and the end product, film, against technology limitations?
I think that it's the other way around. How do you balance technology limitations with story? And I would tell you that you don't embark on something unless you know the technology can be there for you to do it, which is why we didn't do Avatar. For 10 years, we didn't even embark on that because the technology really wasn't there. I think story has to lead, and technology has to service. When you do the reverse, when you say, okay, here's what technology will do, and it's leading you, you're going to have unsuccessful, unrewarding, unfulfilling product. So to me, it's always about saying, okay, here's the story, what are the technologies we can find? And if we do have limitations, how do we come up with clever ways of not letting the audience know that we might have had limitations? On Titanic, we used some very simple, old-fashioned tricks in certain instances. We did a forced perspective hallway that looked like it was hundreds and hundreds of feet. It wasn't a visual effect, but it told the story of the ship and the size of the ship. It was a simple routine. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. We used a giant tire and painted it like a Cheerios cookie to tell that story. So there are ways to do things. It's not always about technology answering it. Dick Tracy, we used prosthetics. Very simple technique. Two great makeup artists, John Caglione and Doug Drexler, who I'd worked with before, came out and did that show. Again, very simple. Wasn't about technology. It was about servicing the story and what did that story need.
So John, how do you solve this problem then? You're a good problem solver, I can see that. You've got the most successful film ever in terms of box office. You've got literally billions of people saying, we need more of this, we want more. And you're now starting to go into production on the so-called sequels, and there's a rumor mill that surrounds all of these things. I just went to Google, and it was very easy to see that people are already talking, and then they're talking about things they don't know very much about.
Right.
So tell us about, do you have any anxiety about that? You don't seem to. You seem to really be a very calm person, but you're setting out to try to replicate the greatest success ever.
No, we're not.
No.
We're not. We're trying to set out to make a movie that on its own is worth making. We're not concerned about the box office. Why are we making this movie? Jim Cameron has done 2 sequels in his career. And I would argue that both times those sequels lived up to or exceeded what the original movies did. That's our goal. creatively. Forget box office. We can't control that. All we can say is, here's a movie that we think is worth making. And so we're focusing on the script, we're focusing on the story. We have a lot of those technology things. We don't have to solve them this time. We'll have to solve other things, continue to push things. But what is that story we want to tell? How do we play off of the same themes that people responded to in the first movie? And then all we want to do is deliver a movie that we believe the public is going to accept. You know, to me, you know, I remember seeing a one-woman show that Lily Tomlin did. And she was a bag lady in that show, if you remember. And she did this whole bit with a Campbell's soup can, where Campbell's soup was her staple in life. It's what she ate. And then she walked by Andy Warhol's painting, and she was so confused. And somebody explained to her that that's soup and that's art. And at the end of the play, she came out of character. And she said that she's learned on her journey that she's the soup and the audience is the art. And I think that's how I really look at the films. It's about playing to a movie, creating a movie that plays for an audience. If it plays and it goes blockbuster business, great. If it plays and it doesn't, but we can be proud of the movie, that's okay too.
I'm going to try to believe that.
No, you can't control it. And we believe that if we deliver what we envision, it will, because we believe we're making the movie for a mass audience and not a small audience. You know, don't make a movie for your 6 friends. But if you could do it, but you can't sit there and say, you know, some of the tragic disasters we've had around the world recently. You don't know when that's going to happen again, how that's going to affect your release. It's out of your control. So I think, you know, we can only control what we can control. And at some point, it's over. And the last moment we can control it is when we walk into the premiere. And we're showing that movie, and it's out there. And if the audience responds, and they're crying when we want them to cry, and laughing when we want them to laugh, and emoting when we want them to emote, we've done our job. And let fate will carry it the rest of the way.
I'm not nervous for you.
But and by the way,
yeah.
I'm always nervous. You know, and again, that's something else that someone said to me when I was a freshman in New York, not in Staten Island, but in the Bronx, and I was playing on the varsity football team, and the coach came up to me before the first game, and he goes, "John, are you nervous?" Now, you know, you're 14 years old or whatever. What's the right answer? And I said, "Yes, I'm nervous." And he said, "Good." He said, because when you stop being nervous, it means you stop caring. So, you know, I tell people, and reporters will come up to me, "Well, you're nervous?" "Yeah, I'm nervous." "Why?" "Because I care." That's why.
Well, maybe that's another good piece of advice. Care.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Care a lot.
Definitely.
Well, it shows in the work that you guys have produced, because you care, and therefore we care. We
That's
care
great.
a lot.
Right. And you know what? But the actors care. I mean, you know, you look at a movie like Avatar that so much is talked about the technology and all that stuff. It's what Zoe Saldana did. It's what Sam Worthington did. They're the people who captivated and took us on this journey. The world might have been magical. The world might have done all those things. But if we didn't care about those characters, it wouldn't mean anything. And they embraced what we were doing, and they trusted us that the technology would not overshadow and not change the performance that they were giving us. So,
I want to give an opportunity for some people here to ask questions of you. I'm sure there are plenty of people with questions. Yes. If you can wait for the microphone.
Hello, my name is Billy. I graduated from here in 2003.
congratulations.
And thanks. It was a lot of work. You said that when people ask you, what is the movie about, you say, don't answer with the plot, answer with the theme. You have a specific example of that?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, you can look at, you know, True Lies. True Lies, when we were doing True Lies, and people would say, what is that movie, you know, what's it about? We don't say, here's the plot, and they're bad guys and doing this, and do. We say, it's about keeping a marriage together. That's what that movie's about. And I'm just using another Jim movie, Aliens. Aliens is a mother-daughter story. It's a mother-daughter love story. wrapped up in a science fiction horror movie that Sigourney Weaver gets nominated for Best Actress out of. So there has to be something more than that. You know, what is Avatar about? Avatar is about, you know, what the first image and the last image of the movie are the same image. Jake opening his eyes. And it's about challenging people to open their eyes and to see people beyond maybe the color of their skin, to see the world like they've never seen it before, to understand that you know, the unlikeliest of heroes can figuratively and literally rise out of a wheelchair. And if Jake can do that, maybe there's a hero inside of each one of us. That's what Avatar's about.
Yes. Can you pass the mic? Oh, sorry.
We'll be able to hear her, and I'll repeat the question.
Yes. Well, I'm a producer director, and I'm
My condolences.
You need a partner.
I'm ready to make my first feature, and I just, you know, 12 minutes is the most I've made, and I'm ready to do it. So what's your advice?
You know, again, find the script that when you read the script, it fuels your passion. And it does all those things that we've talked about today, that it engages you. You know, one of the things I think that Jim does in his stories, it's relatable people against extraordinary backdrops. And, you know, I think extraordinary doesn't have to be on a scale, but to make those characters relatable and identifiable and tell a story that you feel comfortable telling. Something that you can relate to, that is very personal to you, and go for it.
Thank you.
Yes, right behind.
Now he's just doing the easy mic version.
Easy, really easy.
Somebody raised their hand over there, was waving frantically. No, pass
Now
the
you're
mic back.
challenging me.
Thanks for calling me Mr. Landau, and thank you,
Just
Professor.
John, please.
Okay, thank you, John. Anyways, I'm very interested in the collaborations that you guys do, so I was wondering, how has the collaboration with James Horner, the composer, changed from Titanic to Avatar?
You know, it's interesting. Jim was very hesitant to use James on Titanic. While he loved the score on Aliens, it was not necessarily a great working experience. Jim had a lot of different stuff going on and coming in at that time. And, you know, then when Horner came in on Titanic, James gave himself to the movie. Most composers will work, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks on a movie and then go off and do another movie. James dedicated like a year to Titanic just to make it work and to write the music and to have Jim re-edit it and place things in different positions. And they started working on a collaboration that way that was much more interactive, iterative than they had on Aliens, where Jim Cameron was able to take a piece of music, slide it a little bit, let James Horner see it, let James be inspired by it, all of these different things. And, you know, the results speak for itself. I mean, I think that score that he did, you know, for Titanic is remarkable. Also, I want to tell a little James Horner story, which is we never asked him to go write a pop song. James Horner took it upon himself to write My Heart Will Go On. He got Will Jennings to do the lyrics. He came into our office at Lightstorm. Jim wasn't there. And he played a demo track of the song that he had already gotten Celine Dion to sing. And we heard it, we went, whoa. And we went out and he shared it with Jim, and Jim heard it once. And he said, I don't want to hear it again. I'm going to have someone put it on at the end of the movie, and I'm going to watch the movie and see if it fits. But that's something that James Horner went out on his own and did. When he came back and we started to talk about Avatar, there was really no other choice. We didn't look at other composers because that had been such a successful collaboration. But we brought James in and we challenged him. And we challenged him to go beyond where he had gone creatively before. And a lot of this was me at the time just talking to him. That idea of being able to combine indigenous sounding music with a traditional classical score. And would he embrace that? Because we would only do it that way. We had in the script more actual Na'vi songs that were a part of the movie that you know you might see later on. And James really did embrace that, and he you know engaged with the music ethnologist and learned different sounds and tried to incorporate those back into the music. And I think that to me, when I look back at the Oscars and look at what we were lucky enough to win and what we didn't win, I think one of the tragedies is that Horner didn't win for that score, because what he did and the complexity of it, he had to live up on a musical basis with everything that existed on a visual basis. And he did that, and it felt organic. And it was really interesting, the process that he went through. We got James a music house to work out of. And he worked electronically a lot, trying different sounds, all with the idea of we would later then score it. So we got to hear everything sort of scored in a temp version before we did the full version. And James did a great job.
Okay, now I'm going to have to look at some far-flung corner. All right, over here. Speak up.
I'm a computer science graduate student, and I'm interested in what are you expecting from the technology?
Okay, so the question was, he's a computer science major, and what are we expecting from the computer science technology? Well, we're expecting more. We're expecting higher fidelity in the performance of the characters. We're also, the way we worked on Avatar, we created what we call templates. Template is what we shot on our virtual production stage. We didn't film anything on the stage. We captured the actors for the virtual world. And we used a software at the time called Motion Builder. And Motion Builder was very limited in its tool set for lighting and for other things. We have been working with Weta Digital and Autodesk, who manufactures Motion Builder, to bring a lot of the Maya lighting schemes into Motion Builder. The difference really for us between Motion Builder and Maya is Motion Builder we can do in real time. And the way virtual production would work, if you can imagine this, we're on a barren stage. But when Jim picks up a virtual camera, and it's not a real camera, it's not a photographic camera, it has tracking devices on it. But when he moves this camera around the barren stage we're on, he doesn't see the stage. He sees the world of Pandora in a virtual sense in real time. So we're working on elevating those capabilities. Why is that important? Because the more ground touchstones that we can put in our templates that we give to Weta Digital, the more accurate they'll be able to replicate them in the final shots, and the more efficient that process will be, allowing them to spend even more time on realizing the performances and enhancing the story.
One more?
I got two more.
Yeah.
John, I had a question for you about Titanic. When the opening
The ship sank.
It was a shame.
The opening weekend grosses for that film weren't, $70 million the way they were for Titanic. And was there any, when that film first opened, was there any thought that oh no, this only made $25 million is a disaster? And at what point did you realize that Titanic was a huge hit?
We were trying to manage everybody's expectations about what the opening weekend could be, because Titanic was a 2-hour and 74-minute movie. Right. 3 hour and 14-minute movie. So we knew that we couldn't have a 7 o'clock show and a 9 o'clock show and an 11 o'clock show. We just couldn't fill that many slots. So we knew that we couldn't open to $100 million or $70 million. So we were trying to be out there conditioning the press, to conditioning the studio, for them to understand and manage the correct expectations. I'm a firm believer on any movie, and I said the same thing about Avatar. It's not what did you do opening weekend. It's what did you do your third weekend. What are you doing at that point? That's when you're going to know how you've done or haven't done. You're going to see a trend. You're going to know what you're building towards. You're going to know what you're not building to. And it was really after that third weekend on Titanic where we said, okay, we played like that. The interesting thing about Titanic is the single biggest day for Titanic was in the 8th week of release on Valentine's Day. And You know, I invite everybody back to theaters next April. We're re-releasing Titanic in 3D. So.
Find your date. You got enough time.
Exactly. Well, what's really interesting is we realize that we're now going to be playing to a whole audience that was conceived after their parents saw Titanic.
That's a scary thought. I just want to go back really quick to a kind of a workflow question because of the computer science query. Now, you're doing this consolidation of a lot of the workflow to the Manhattan Beach studios, and that kind of flies in the face of what seems to be this trend of accelerating, distributing various jobs and tasks around the globe. Tell us just a little bit about why you're choosing to do this consolidation.
Well, so much of the film Avatar, takes place in the computer-generated world. So we're going to be using Manhattan Beach Studios to really create the scenes and the moments that are in the computer-generated world. And this goes back to making people feel a part of the process. If we were working from all these remote locations, they wouldn't feel a part of the process. All of the talented artists who are in what we call our lab, our virtual art department, all these other things. So not only are we taking over Manhattan Beach Studios, but we asked them to cut holes in the stage walls to the offices that are adjacent to it and put windows in so that the crews up on the second floor can feel a part of what's going on the stage, even if they're not on the stage on those days, and vice versa, to make that connection. So to me, it's sort of that rallying, that camaraderie of having a campus where we're all together sharing in a common goal.
Fantastic. Yes.
I'm Andrew from Houston, one of the winners of the YouTube
Yeah,
contest.
I know that.
I can hear it in your accent.
Nice to meet you. I appreciate you doing this.
Pleasure.
My question for you is, I'm extremely new in filmmaking. I have loved what I've done, but everything I've worked on so far, I get to a point where I feel like this is done. I've stepped in, something that's I can't finish, and I have no idea how to get out of this. Does that feeling ever go away? And and if it doesn't, what do you do when you get to that point?
Well, I think it does go away. I think when you get to that point, take a step back, give yourself that breath. Try and look at something, very objectively, what you're working on, and try and say again, how would you view this as an audience? How would I solve whatever you're in front of? For us, it's the opposite. For us, we don't think our movies are ever done. We would still be finishing shots on Avatar right now, if we could. And I remember on Titanic, there was one shot that Jim finaled, and I kept telling Rob Legato and the team at Digital Domain, we can make it better, we can make it better, we can make it better. And I forced them, to keep working on it. It was like right up to the release. And when the movie was released, I get a knock on the door, and there's a package for me. And it's a still frame from that shot, signed by all the art. So, I think, for us, and Jim talks about, another thing that Jim says that I think is pretty funny. He says, if you're on a filming set and you work 12 hours, all that means is you've run out of good ideas. So, we're always there pressing and pushing and trying to really get as much in as we can. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, Jon, thank you.
now, if you
So
want, I know
very
we have to
much.
go off the air, but I'd be glad to stay for a little bit and ask a few more questions
That
if you
would
want.
be unbelievable.
He's
That
got
really
some
would.
filing to do.
All right. Are we off? No, we're still running. So, okay, then let's pass the mic down.
All right.
That's really generous of you.
This gentleman's had his hands up the whole time in the blue.
Thank you, John. I come from an entirely different world, but my daughter is going to graduate school here, so thank you. Actually, I'm in renewable energy, and thank Google for putting over $1 billion a year into our space right now.
Well, maybe we need to talk because we're down at the Manhattan Beach Studios. We're putting solar down there.
Well, I just came from the wind power show for
Right.
2 days, which was phenomenal. But the big question there, and this is my question, is capital. None of this happens. All this creativity, all these people here that are award winners and everything, doesn't happen without the capital. So what would your suggestion be to young and older filmmakers on the best way to get the capital to make the blockbusters that you do?
Well, again, I think that there has to be a little bit of a P.T. Barnum in all of us. And it's a question of saying, how do I sell something? You know, what's your business plan? I tell people that every movie is a new startup company. And sort of as the producer, you're the CEO of that company. So how do you go out there and how do you bring in the financing? How do you do these different things? Now, we don't do it with independent financing. We have to go to a studio, but it's the same type of struggle. So, you know, in many ways, you know, our business plan starts with our script. That's really the business plan. What we try and do, and what we've done both for Titanic and for Avatar, we created visual presentations because it was very hard for the money people to see from the business plan, the script, what we envisioned in it. So we created a 17-minute, we called it art reel, of Avatar artwork. And we put it in the Reader's Digest version of the movie. We sort of laid it out in linear order, and we brought in actors who did voiceover. Not characters who we actually cast in the movie ultimately, but they read certain lines, whether it's I see you, whether it's, and we would bridge it musically, and it just was able to say to people who had a very hard sense of trying to visualize blue people with tails in a world with plants that suck into the ground. So so we used that as a selling tool, and we actually let that lead before we gave the script. Because the script was a very hard read for people without being able to put it in a visual context. When they read about a Leonopteryx and it's red and it's got wings or seven, what does that look like? Well, they saw some of our very early illustrations, you know, to put that in. So I think in whatever you're doing, how do you do that? You know, on Titanic, we did the same type of thing. And even when we made our budget submittal on Titanic, I put together a package with images from the wreck, quotes from the movie, lines from the movie, and put it together. So when people are reading whatever they're reading, even if it's something like the budget, they're keeping in context what it's being used for and what it's going towards.
That goes back to your advice before. Put yourself in the shoes of the
That's
audience,
right.
and the audience may be the.
That's right. In
the
that
money
case,
guys.
what's the money? They're your first audience.
Yeah.
They're the ones that you have to really sell, and we had to do that quite a bit. Getting Fox to bite off on Avatar was not an easy thing for a studio to do. I mean, they had a lot of reasons not to make the movie, and nobody ever got fired from a studio job for not making a movie. So you got to keep that in mind. So you got to give them all the reasons why they can justify to their boss that they made the movie. Well, we saw this art reel. Well, we got this. Well, we saw a screen test. Whatever it is, that's why we did it. So, thank you.
Hi, John. Brian from the YouTube Creator Institute. My question is, what are your thoughts on the impact of social media on the future of feature films and entertainment in general?
I think it has a bigger impact on entertainment in general. I think its impact on future films is that I think that the YouTube is going to be the breeding grounds for the next Jim Camerons, the next Steven Spielbergs of the world, because you have the opportunity to do all those things and to distribute and to get it out there and to get reactions. I think it's very exciting. I look at it as an opportunity. And I think, for me as a producer, I want to figure out how do we utilize that for the movies that we're making, and how do we utilize it in marketing and expanding our social media and all those things. So I think it's a great opportunity, for filmmakers to use at some point as a springboard. Look, is it going to happen to everybody? No. Just like the music videos didn't for everybody, but David Fincher came out of music videos. A number of other great directors, did as well. So I see that coming out of the social media that we have today as well.
Thanks.
John, thanks for coming out. You've produced
Mr.
films.
Landau. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Mr. Landau. You've produced films for both James Cameron and Steven Soderbergh, both outrageously successful directors, but both, I think, very different directors. I was wondering if you could speak to their similarities and differences.
I think their similarities are story-driven. They're both story-driven directors. I think, Steven wants to do it in a much more tactile way, where Steven works with things that are right in front of him. He finds the best opportunities. He works with actors. Jim has the ability to direct things in his head, to see things where they aren't, where they don't exist. But I think they both always come back to story and character, whether Steven's doing an Ocean's 11 or whether he's doing a Solaris, he's always focusing on the character.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm currently producing a project with a director who I think has kind of lost sight of the story aspect and kind of become very enamored by the technical aspect. Do you have any advice for kind of getting her back on track, so to speak? Because we're halfway through production and running into a lot of money issues, among other things. And it's just where it's at a point where we can't afford to do everything she technically wants, and the story doesn't necessarily demand all of it.
Again, what I would suggest, and I don't know the situation 100%, so it's a difficult situation, but I would suggest on a down day, not in the middle of production, on a day where it's a Saturday or a Sunday with an off day, ask her, I think you said, to come look at something with you, come watch something with you, and ask her to look at it objectively. Is that what you wanted it to be? Is that what we first started out at the beginning of our road? Was that what you envisioned? And where does it go from there? Because if you're doing this here, where do we end up? I mean, you might be using a bad example because it might be the ending that's an issue. But Jim Cameron came into a script meeting we had once with two writers, and it was a first draft of a script. And he said to them, if you want me to feel this way at the end, which you told me you want me to feel, how do I get there from this scene here where you've already done it? And that was his only note. He didn't get into the minutia of anything else, but it put everything else in perspective. And I think it's getting it to step back and say, okay, when we first started out in doing this, here's what we wanted it to be. Do you think that what we've just watched, we can still do that?
Thank you. It'll be very helpful.
That's called $1 million advice. Right back there.
How do you feel about the merging of interactive media technologies and the technologies you're talking about, including motion capture and the future of those two merging?
Well, I think interactive media is great. I think it has its place. I don't think it's going to replace films. So how do you take advantage of those things that you have to offer? I think we're in a world today where people want to feel a part of something, and interactive media allows us to feel a part of it. So I think that's very exciting. How do we do it in more engaging ways? How do we do it with I'm just going to deal with video gaming for a second. The Wii initially gave people a way to interact differently than before, and now Kinect is doing it in a whole different way. How do we take that to the next level? How do we do it where your face is in that world and you're doing all those different things? I think those are very exciting opportunities that we have. It's not necessarily things that we will delve into directly, but we would love to partner with the people who want to be on the frontier of doing that, who can take advantage maybe of some of the digital assets that we've created. Because if we're creating everything digitally, it lends itself so easily for interactivity. Interactivity on something live action is much more difficult. But I think the idea of, is there a way where you experience a story and you experience it differently based on an audience's reaction? So you might go see that same movie and get 3 different endings because the audience has reacted differently. That's a different way of interactivity. But digital media and digital content providing those type of opportunities, and where those answers are, I don't think any of us know yet.
Thank you.
We'll take one more question. We're on a time frame. Good.
But by the way, I would say a woman. Wait, you want half a movie? No, just kidding. You know, my motivation is the premiere. Is that sense of being in a theater and watching people respond to something that I had a small hand in creating. I think that, you know, we do so much in life, all of us, every day. We never see the results of what we've done. And that moment in the premiere is an opportunity for us to see the results of what we've done. And I thought about that the other day when I was with a gentleman who was a very philanthropic gentleman. And he talked about giving and giving and giving, and he does. And he wants to give to things where he can see it go to use. He doesn't want it to just go away. He wants to do it in things where he can see a building that was built because of his contribution. He wants to do it where he can see a student go to school where he's done it. And so what gets me up really every morning is the idea of working towards that premiere. And one of the things that I love, and if you look back at the movies that I've been lucky enough to produce, they're all sort of created worlds. And I love that idea of creating a world, whether it's the world of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or whether it's the streets of Dick Tracy, and that enjoyment of transporting people to another place. Why do we go to entertainment today? We go for escapism. We go to escape the world that we live in. And to me, every day I go to a set and I walk onto this set of Titanic, I'm escaping. I'm going to a different place. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
And so all good things must come to an end. Jon, thank you so very much for giving.
Best of
your
luck to
time and
everybody.
talent. Michael, thank you. Just to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, next Tuesday night in this same room, we will have Melissa Rosenberg, who is an acclaimed award-winning writer of Dexter and the Twilight series of motion pictures. And on the 14th of June, we'll have Mick G., the director, here. So we hope you can join us. We look forward to seeing you and wish you all a safe drive home and a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.